There's this 500-year-old playbook for power that's so influential, it's literally shaped politics, psychology, and yeah, even our modern workplaces. It is controversial, it's ruthless, and it's called Machiavellianism. Let's get into it.
All right, let's kick things off with a simple but, wow, a really profound question. Is it better to be feared or to be loved? It's a question that cuts right to the heart of leadership and influence. And it's the central problem one man tried to solve half a millennium ago. So, to really get this whole Machiavelliism, you first have to get the man, Niccolò Machiavelli. And look, he wasn't some philosopher sitting in an ivory tower. No way. He was a real-life diplomat in Renaissance Florence, and he was trying to solve a very real and very dangerous problem.
You have to picture Machiavelli's world. It was just chaos. Italy wasn't one country. It was this messy patchwork of city-states, all constantly at war with each other, all vulnerable to invasion. As a diplomat, he saw it all firsthand, how fast power could be won and then, just as fast, lost. So in 1513, he sits down and writes his masterpiece, The Prince. And it wasn't a book about ideals. It was a practical, brutally honest handbook for the rulers of the day, the Medici family. His goal? Simple. Give them the tools they needed to unite a bleeding, fractured Italy.
And this right here is the absolute key to understanding him. This pretty bleak view of humanity. His advice didn't come from a place of malice, but from what he saw as just clear-eyed realism. He believed that people, at their core, are selfish, they're untrustworthy. So for a leader to have any chance of succeeding, they had to work with that reality, not some fantasy of how people should.
Okay, and this is where things start to get, well, pretty shocking for a lot of people. His advice wasn't about being a good person. It was about being an effective ruler. He basically ripped politics away from traditional morality, creating this guide to power that was just as ruthless as it was practical. I mean, this first bit of advice is it's chillingly pragmatic. Machiavelli's logic? Super simple. Half measures just create enemies who are still strong enough to come after you. So he argued, if you have to hurt someone, you do it so decisively that they can't possibly get revenge. It's a perfect example of his the ends justify the means thinking. And here it is, his direct answer to our opening question. For Machiavelli, love is flimsy. It depends on the goodwill of other people, which, let's be honest, he thought was totally unreliable. Fear, on the other hand, well, fear is maintained by the threat of punishment, and that is something a ruler can actually control. So when you're forced to pick one, fear was just the safer, more dependable tool for staying in power.
And boom, this quote just perfectly sums up his entire argument. A ruler who's surrounded by people who are definitely not good is going to be absolutely destroyed if he insists on being good all the time. For Machiavelli, virtue was a tool. A prince should look virtuous, merciful, faithful, humane, all that stuff. But he had to be ready, mentally, to act in the complete opposite way if it was necessary to protect the state.
So for centuries, right, Machiavelli's name was basically shorthand for a political tyrant. But then, in the 20th century, something really fascinating happens. His ideas make this massive jump from political science straight into the psychology lab, and Machiavellianism gets a whole new life as a personality trait. So in the 1970s, a couple of psychologists, Richard Christie and Florence Geis, they had this aha moment. They realized the exact strategies Machiavelli was writing about for princes, well, regular people were using them all the time in their daily lives. So they defined it as a personality trait, a tendency to manipulate people, a cynical view of others, and a super pragmatic moral code where winning is way more important than being right.
Today, psychologists actually place Machiavellianism inside what they call the dark triad of personality traits, and it's right there in the middle. It's not as openly grandiose as narcissism, and it's not as impulsive or antisocial as psychopathy. The real signature of the Machiavellian trait is that it's calculated, it's goal-oriented. These are master manipulators who are always playing the long game.
Okay, so let's bring this out of the history books and into our world, because this isn't about princes and castles anymore. This personality trait is very much alive and well today, and one of the most common places to see it in action is the modern workplace. So how do you spot it?
Well, research on people who score high in Machiavellianism, we can call them high mocks, shows a really clear pattern of behavior. On the outside, they can seem emotionally cold, maybe a little distant. They're the ones who hoard information to keep their power, and they can absolutely poison team loyalty. They're also much more willing to bend ethical rules or even practice favoritism to get what they want. But here's the twist. For all their focus on winning, they often report having lower job satisfaction and way more stress.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. It's a total paradox. High mocks often believe they are smarter and more capable than everyone else in the room. But the actual research, it tells a totally different story. There is no consistent link between this trait and being more intelligent or actually more successful. In fact, in some studies, they actually perform worse than their colleagues. Maybe because they're spending all their energy on manipulation instead of just doing the job.
Which leads us right to the big debate that's still happening today. Is this trait purely a defect, just a destructive personality flaw? Or could it, in some situations, actually be a useful adaptive tool?
You've basically got two sides to this coin. On one hand, the argument is that this trait is just plain destructive. It's unethical, it completely shatters trust, it hurts teams, and at the end of the day, it's all self-serving. But the other side argues it might actually be adaptive. In really competitive, messy environments with very few rules, that same strategic, whatever-it-takes mindset might be what drives innovation or helps the team pull through a crisis. And that's the question I want to leave you with. From a 16th century prince just trying to save his country, all the way to the modern office, Machiavelli's ideas force us to face a pretty uncomfortable truth. In a world that so often rewards results, sometimes above everything else, where do we draw that line between strategic ambition and destructive manipulation? The answer, it seems, is just as complicated today as it was 500 years ago. Thanks for joining The Explainer.